April 17, 1952. Federal Courthouse, Lower Manhattan. Judge Harold Patterson had just sentenced Bumpy Johnson to 15 years in federal prison. The courtroom erupted. But what happened in the next 60 minutes outside that courthouse would force the judge to do something no federal judge had done in 23 years. Reverse his own sentence. 300 reporters packed the courthouse steps. Bumpy walked out in handcuffs, flanked by 6 federal marshals. The plan was simple. Load him into the transport van. Drive him to Sing Sing. Lock him away until 1967. That was the plan. Bumpy smiled. The marshals didn't understand why. A 15-year sentence wasn't something to smile about. But Bumpy Johnson knew something they didn't. Something that would change everything in the next hour. Because while Judge Patterson was signing the sentencing papers inside, 40,000 people were gathering outside. Let me take you back 3 weeks to understand how we got here. March 28, 1952. The federal government had been trying to take down Bumpy Johnson for 7 years. 7 long years of surveillance, wiretaps, undercover operations, informants. They'd tried racketeering charges. Failed. Tax evasion. Failed. Extortion. Failed. Every single charge collapsed like a house of cards because witnesses disappeared. Evidence vanished. Juries refused to convict. The FBI had a thick file on Bumpy Johnson. 347 pages. Documented every known associate. Every business he touched. Every dollar they could trace. But none of it stuck. One FBI agent told his supervisor the truth everyone knew but nobody wanted to say out loud. We can't touch him because Harlem won't let us. Every witness we flip gets a visit. Not a threat. Not violence. Just a conversation. Someone reminds them what Bumpy did for their family. What he did for their neighborhood. And suddenly they can't remember anything. But this time was different. Agent Robert Sullivan had spent 18 months building what he called an airtight case. Numbers running. The illegal lottery game that made Bumpy millions. Sullivan had 18 witnesses. Real witnesses. People from outside Harlem who had no loyalty to Bumpy. Bank records showing money movement. Wiretaps with Bumpy's voice. Everything documented. Everything clean. Everything bulletproof. Sullivan walked into his boss's office in February 1952 with a stack of evidence 4 inches thick. Slammed it on the desk. We finally got him. Bumpy Johnson goes away for 15 years minimum. Maybe 20 if we're lucky. His boss looked at the evidence. Looked at Sullivan. Asked the question that mattered. You sure this time? Because we've been here before. 5 times before. Sullivan didn't hesitate. This time is different. This time we have him. The trial lasted 9 days. Day 1, the prosecution opened with their star witness. A banker from New Jersey who processed Bumpy's deposits. Explained how the money flowed. How the numbers operation worked. Defense couldn't shake him. Day 2, more witnesses. Shop owners who served as collection points. Explained the system. How players picked their numbers. How winners got paid. How Bumpy's organization ran like clockwork. Day 3 through 7, the wiretaps. The jury heard Bumpy's voice discussing operations. Talking about payouts. Organizing the business. His lawyer objected 17 times. The judge overruled every single objection. Day 8, closing arguments. The prosecution painted Bumpy as a crime lord. A predator. Someone who exploited poor people desperate for hope. Made millions off their suffering. The defense argued something different. Reminded the jury that numbers running wasn't violent crime. Nobody got hurt. People played voluntarily. And most importantly, asked them to consider what Bumpy did with that money. The community programs. The families he helped. The protection he provided. Day 9, the jury got the case at 2 p.m. Bumpy sat quiet in the courtroom during every single day. Didn't speak. Didn't react. Didn't show emotion. Just watched. His lawyer argued the case. The prosecution presented evidence. Bumpy just observed everything with those calm eyes that had seen everything Harlem could throw at a man. Some people in the gallery whispered that he looked too calm, too confident, like he knew something nobody else knew. They were right. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Came back at 6 p.m. The foreman stood up. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." Judge Patterson scheduled sentencing for April 17th. Standard procedure for cases like this meant 10 to 15 years. The federal government was celebrating. Sullivan got promoted. The newspapers ran headlines, "Harlem's untouchable finally touched." But something was happening in Harlem that the federal government didn't see coming. The day after the guilty verdict, a man named Marcus Williams walked into every barbershop, every restaurant, every pool hall, every church in Harlem. Marcus wasn't a gangster. He was a community organizer. He'd known Bumpy for 20 years. Watched him rise from nothing to everything. Watched him protect their neighborhood when nobody else would. Marcus carried a simple message to every person he met. "They're taking Bumpy away. We need to show them what that means." He started at Salem Methodist Church on 129th Street. Spoke to Reverend James, who'd known Bumpy since 1934. The Reverend remembered when Bumpy donated $5,000 to keep the church from foreclosure. Never asked for recognition. Never wanted his name on anything. Just handed over the money and said, "Harlem needs this church." Marcus went to Joe's barbershop on Lenox Avenue. Talked to the owner, who remembered when Italian mobsters tried to force protection payments from every black-owned business in Harlem. $200 a month or they'd burn you out. Bumpy made them disappear. Didn't charge the business owners a cent. Just said, "Nobody shakes down Harlem but Harlem." He visited the Marcus Garvey Community Center on 125th Street. Spoke with the director, who explained that Bumpy funded the entire after-school program. 75 kids got tutoring, hot meals, and a safe place to go every day. All paid for by Bumpy's numbers money. Marcus walked into Sylvia's restaurant. Talked to mothers who remembered the winter of 1947. The terrible winter when heating oil prices tripled and families were freezing. Bumpy bought heating oil for 300 families. Just showed up with trucks. Filled their tanks. Refused payment. Story after story. Block after block. Business after business. See, the federal government saw Bumpy Johnson as a criminal. A numbers runner. A mobster. Someone who broke the law and deserved punishment. But Harlem saw something completely different. They saw the man who paid rent for 67 families during the Depression when banks were foreclosing and landlords were evicting. The man who funded 3 community centers that gave kids somewhere safe to go. The man who made sure every kid in Harlem got a Christmas present, even the ones whose parents couldn't afford it. The man who kept the Italian mob from moving into their neighborhood and taking over their businesses, their streets, their lives. Bumpy Johnson ran illegal numbers games. True. Nobody denied that. Nobody pretended he was a saint. But he also ran food drives when people were starving. Scholarship programs when kids couldn't afford school. Protection for businesses that couldn't protect themselves from organized crime that didn't care about Harlem, only about extracting money from it. In Harlem, Bumpy wasn't just a gangster. He was a governor. A protector. A man who filled the gaps the government left empty. The gaps nobody else cared enough to fill. One woman told Marcus something that summarized everything. "The government takes our taxes and gives us nothing. Bumpy takes our numbers money and gives us everything. You tell me who the real criminal is." Marcus Williams spent 3 weeks organizing. Calling churches. Visiting neighborhood associations. Talking to mothers, fathers, workers, business owners. Speaking at community meetings. Spreading the word from Harlem to Washington Heights to the Bronx. The message spread like wildfire through every network Harlem had. April 17th. Be at the courthouse. Bring everyone. Bring your children. Bring your parents. Bring your neighbors. We're going to show them what Bumpy Johnson means to us. People asked Marcus what they should do at the courthouse. Should they protest? Should they shout? Should they demand the judge change his mind? Marcus gave everyone the same answer. No. We stand silent. We stand peaceful. We stand together. We don't threaten. We don't yell. We just show them that 40,000 people care about one man. Let them see that and decide what it means." The federal marshals had no idea what was coming. April 17th arrived. Judge Patterson entered his courtroom at 9 a.m. The gallery was packed. Standing room only. Bumpy sat at the defense table. His lawyer made a final plea for leniency. The prosecution demanded the maximum sentence. Judge Patterson banged his gavel at 10:47 a.m. "Mr. Johnson, you have been found guilty of conspiracy to operate an illegal gambling enterprise. I hereby sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. You will be remanded into custody immediately." The courtroom erupted in shouts. Bumpy's supporters screamed. His lawyer objected. The marshals stood up. Judge Patterson banged his gavel 6 times, demanding order. Bumpy Johnson stood up slowly, turned around, looked at the packed courtroom, and smiled that same smile that would confuse the marshals 20 minutes later. Because Bumpy could hear something the judge couldn't. Through the thick courthouse walls, through the sealed windows, through the heavy oak doors. A sound was building outside. A rumble. Growing louder. Growing stronger. The marshals handcuffed Bumpy at 11:03 a.m. Led him through the courthouse corridors. Down the stairs. Toward the main entrance. They opened those heavy courthouse doors at 11:12 a.m. Nobody was prepared for what they saw. 40,000 people packed the streets outside the federal courthouse. 40,000. The crowd stretched 6 blocks in every direction. 6 full city blocks of human beings standing shoulder to shoulder. The police had never seen anything like it. Not for a protest. Not for a parade. Not for anything. Mothers holding babies wrapped in blankets despite the spring warmth. Elderly men in their Sunday suits, the ones they saved for church and funerals. Teenagers who'd skipped school. Workers who'd taken the day off, knowing they might lose wages they couldn't afford to lose. Store owners who'd closed their shops, losing business they needed. Preachers in their collars. Teachers in their modest dresses. Families who'd brought folding chairs, planning to stay all day if necessary. All of them standing silent. Not a shout. Not a chant. Not a song. Just silence. 40,000 people breathing as one. Waiting as one. The only sound was the wind moving through the crowd like a whisper. The federal marshals froze on the courthouse steps. They'd handled prisoner transports 1,000 times between them. They'd seen protests before. Angry crowds throwing bottles. Violent mobs trying to free prisoners. Organized demonstrations with chants and signs. But this wasn't that. This was something else entirely. Something none of them had training for. 40,000 people standing in complete silence. Not shouting. Not threatening. Not breaking a single law. Just standing. Watching. Waiting. Bearing witness. Marshal Davis, the lead officer with 19 years of experience, grabbed his radio with a hand that trembled slightly. Called for backup. "We need crowd control at the courthouse. We need it now. We need every available officer." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Marshal Davis, what's the situation? Are they violent? Do you need riot gear?" Davis looked at the sea of faces. Saw grandmothers. Saw children. Saw workers. Saw families. "No. They're not violent. They're just here. All of them. Just standing." "Then what's the problem?" Davis couldn't explain it. How do you explain that 40,000 people standing peacefully is somehow more powerful than 40,000 people rioting? How do you explain that silence can be louder than screaming? Just send backup. You need to see this. But there was nothing to control. Nothing to manage. Nothing to disperse. The crowd wasn't violent. Wasn't breaking any laws. They were just there. Standing. Bearing witness. Making their statement without saying a word. Bumpy walked down the courthouse steps in handcuffs. The marshals surrounded him. The transport van waited 30 feet away. 30 feet through a sea of 40,000 people. The crowd parted silently. Created a path. But they didn't leave. didn't disperse. They just watched. Every eye on Bumpy Johnson. Every face showing the same expression. Not anger. Not hatred. Something more powerful than either. Respect. Marshal Davis had been a federal officer for 19 years. He'd transported murderers, bank robbers, mobsters, crime bosses. He'd never seen anything like this. A news reporter from CBS pushed through the crowd with his cameraman. Looking for a story. Looking for someone to interview. He spotted an elderly woman near the courthouse steps. She was 73 years old. Held a wooden cane in one hand. Wore a hat she'd probably owned for 30 years. The reporter pushed his microphone toward her face. "Ma'am, why are you here today?" She looked at him like he'd asked the dumbest question in the world. "Bumpy paid my rent for 6 months when my husband died in 1943. 6 months. Wouldn't take no for an answer. Just showed up on the first of every month with an envelope. My grandson got a scholarship to Howard University because of him. Bumpy heard the boy was smart, but we couldn't afford tuition. $2,000 appeared. Anonymous donor. But I knew. Everybody knew." She paused. Looked at the courthouse. "He's not a saint. I'm not going to stand here and tell you the man never broke the law. But he's our saint. You understand? When nobody else cared if we lived or died, Bumpy cared. When nobody else would protect us, Bumpy protected us. When nobody else would help us, Bumpy helped us. So yeah, I'm 73 years old. My knees hurt. My back hurts. But I'm gonna stand here all day if I have to." The reporter moved deeper into the crowd. Found a shopkeeper, maybe 45 years old, wearing his work apron like he'd come straight from his store. "Sir, can you tell us why you're here?" The shopkeeper's jaw tightened. 1949. The Italian mob wanted protection money from every black-owned business in Harlem. $500 a month. Every month. You don't pay, they burn your store. They hurt your family. They destroy everything you built. He pointed at the courthouse. "That man in there made them disappear. Didn't charge us nothing. Didn't ask for a cut. Didn't demand we pay him instead. Just said, Harlem protects its own, and the Italians never came back. My store is still standing because of Bumpy Johnson. My family eats because of him. So you damn right I'm here." A young mother stood nearby, maybe 28, holding a baby girl against her shoulder. The reporter approached her next. "Miss, same question. Why are you here?" She shifted the baby to her other shoulder. "Christmas 1950. We had nothing. My husband got laid off. We couldn't afford presents for our 3 kids. Couldn't afford a decent dinner. Couldn't afford anything." Tears formed in her eyes. Christmas Eve, someone knocked on our door. A woman I'd never seen before. She had bags. Toys for all 3 kids. A turkey. All the fixings. Even gave me $50 cash. Said it was from a community fund. But everyone knew. Bumpy made sure every kid in Harlem had Christmas. She kissed her baby's head. "That's why I'm here. Because he gave my children joy when I couldn't. Because he cared when he didn't have to. Because he's Bumpy." Story after story. 40,000 stories. 40,000 reasons why these people stood in silence. Not because Bumpy was innocent. Everyone knew he wasn't. Because he mattered to them in ways the law couldn't measure. The transport van doors opened. The marshals prepared to load Bumpy inside. This should have taken 2 minutes. Load the prisoner. Close the doors. Drive away. But Marshal Davis looked at those 40,000 faces and realized something. This wasn't about law enforcement anymore. This was about something bigger. He grabbed his radio again. This time he called a different number. Direct line to the U.S. Attorney's Office. "You need to see this. You need to see this right now." Inside the courthouse, Judge Patterson was in his chambers, signing the final sentencing documents, making it official. Bumpy Johnson would serve 15 years starting today. His clerk rushed in without knocking. "Your Honor, you need to come to the window." Judge Patterson had been a federal judge for 12 years. You don't interrupt a federal judge in his chambers. Not unless something extraordinary is happening. He walked to the window, looked down at the street below, saw 40,000 people standing in silence. The judge stood there for 3 minutes, just watching. The crowd wasn't moving, wasn't shouting, just standing. His clerk spoke quietly. "They've been out there for 2 hours, Your Honor. Since before the sentencing. They're not protesting. They're not threatening. They're just there." Judge Patterson had sentenced hundreds of criminals in his career. Bank robbers, murderers, mobsters. He'd seen family members cry, seen supporters shout, seen defendants threaten revenge. He'd never seen this. 40,000 people standing peacefully, making a statement without saying a word. The phone on his desk rang. It was the U.S. Attorney. "Harold, we have a situation. I can see the situation from my window. This isn't just Harlem anymore. CBS is here. NBC. The New York Times. This is about to become national news. Federal judge sentences community leader. 40,000 citizens protest peacefully. How do you think that plays?" Judge Patterson didn't care about politics. He cared about the law. But he also understood something else. The law exists to serve justice. And sometimes justice is more complicated than guilty or not guilty. He hung up the phone, told his clerk to call the marshals. "Bring Mr. Johnson back to the courthouse. Bring him to my chambers." 10 minutes later, Bumpy Johnson sat in Judge Patterson's chambers. Still handcuffed. Still sentenced to 15 years. The judge looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Johnson, I've reviewed the case again. I'm going to vacate your sentence." Bumpy didn't react. Just waited. "I'm going to offer you a choice. Serve 15 years in federal prison. Or serve 5 years house arrest in Harlem with strict conditions. You report to a probation officer weekly. You stay out of the numbers business. You commit one violation, you serve the full 15 years. No appeals. No second chances." "Why?" Bumpy asked. First word he'd spoken in the judge's chambers. Judge Patterson walked to the window, looked down at the 40,000 people still standing in silence. "Because those people out there just taught me something about justice. The law says you're guilty, and you are. But the law also exists to protect communities. And this community is telling me that putting you in prison doesn't protect them. It hurts them." The judge turned back to Bumpy. "I'm not doing this because I think you're innocent. I'm doing this because 40,000 people can't be wrong about who you are to them. That means something." At 2:34 p.m., Judge Patterson walked out to the courthouse steps. The crowd still stood in silence. Cameras rolled. Reporters pushed forward. The judge spoke into a microphone. "After careful consideration, I have modified Mr. Johnson's sentence. He will serve 5 years house arrest in Harlem under strict supervision. This decision reflects both the severity of his crimes and his importance to this community." The crowd erupted. Not in anger. In celebration. 40,000 voices raised at once. Bumpy Johnson walked down those courthouse steps a second time. No handcuffs this time. The crowd surrounded him, touched his shoulders, shook his hand, cried, laughed, celebrated. Marshal Davis watched from the courthouse entrance, turned to his partner. "In 19 years, I've never seen a federal sentence reversed on the same day it was issued." His partner nodded. "You ever seen 40,000 people stand in silence for 3 hours?" "No." "That's why." The newspapers ran different headlines the next day. Community power forces judged to reverse sentence. Harlem saves Bumpy Johnson. Federal judge bows to public pressure. But those headlines missed the real story. This wasn't about pressure. This wasn't about power. This wasn't about forcing anything. This was about 40,000 people standing up to say one simple thing. "This man matters to us." Judge Patterson retired 7 years later. Reporters asked him about the most memorable case of his career. He always gave the same answer. The Bumpy Johnson case taught me that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about understanding the role someone plays in their community. I sentenced a criminal, but 40,000 people showed me I was also sentencing their protector, their provider, their shield. The law needed to account for that. Bumpy Johnson served his 5 years of house arrest. Never violated the terms. Never went back to the numbers business. Died in 1968. But April 17, 1952 became legend in Harlem. The day a federal judge looked out his window and saw what real power looks like. Not badges. Not guns. Not gavels. 40,000 people standing together in silence. Because you can't sentence one man when 40,000 won't let you forget who he really is.